the fabric of America and what makes our country great is that sort of constitutional diversity of having, now 50 states, whereas a guy like Obama wanted the power at the center. And I think if there's a contraction, it's a contraction away from what the Constitution has really created and our founders created, which is a diffusion of power to the states. And they gave that power to the original 13 colonies that then turned into the original 13 states. And instead of giving it all to Washington, D.C., people like Obama, they want to give it to Washington, D.C.
Hey, Culminators, from time to time when I ask people, sometimes relatively prominent people, to culminate with me here on the podcast, and oddly to me, they say, Ron, I would be honored. And I always feel a little bit awkward about that because I'm just me, Ron Coleman. But you'll never hear me say, although I probably should, that I'm honored to have a certain guest. Well, I'm honored in this case because my guest is General Michael Flynn, who really should need no introduction. An extraordinary career, an extraordinary patriot, and unfortunately a symbol of so much that has gone wrong in American politics and law in the last 5, 6, 7 years. And because I know he's super busy promoting his new movie, which we are going to talk about, and which I've had the opportunity to watch part of before we met today, the Flynn movie. Michael Flynn.
That's great, Ron. Hey, thank you so much for having me, and I appreciate you helping to promote this extraordinary film. I mean, it's a film that every person who has seen this film, and there was another group that watched it last night just outside Oklahoma City, a group of friends of mine that held it for people who don't know me, but knew of my story slightly. They came from the region, not just from Oklahoma, but around a couple of other states that are in that area out there near Oklahoma City. And they just sent me in the last 2 hours some of the testimonials from the people that watched this film. And what people now see, who even, who were watching this episode take place with me when I went into government and then was, pushed out of government, and all the persecution that I went through, but really the country went through with the whole fake, false Russiagate affair, that the Mueller investigation that we seem to have, already moved past, right? Which we cannot move past, because that was really the beginning of something that is happening to this beautiful country of ours. So this film is it's an inspiring story of survival. It's told through the lens of my family and I, and certainly with the strength of the faith that we had, that my immediate family and I, my wife and I, and my children had in God, but really the faith that my family had in each other, to be able to rise above this incredible level of persecution and figure out how to fight back and win. And part of winning was to, and in fact, we could not have won without the American people. So the American people, and I mean, like, as my wife says in the movie, they came out in droves to support us. And initially, we couldn't understand why until we started to get their cards and letters. And then when we started to hear what the American people were telling us, which essentially the American people were telling us that they believed so much in what was in the persecution that I was going through. And they began telling my family and I their own personal stories of persecution by elements in our government. And the weaponization of our government just doesn't exist in Washington, D.C. It exists up and down the spectrum from local to federal, and many people in our country have gone through this. Mine was really a heightened level of profile because, of course, I was a general, retired. I was the national security advisor to President Trump, and it was such a miraculous election in 2016 to have beaten the heir apparent to Barack Obama. Now I'm talking about Hillary Clinton, and there were so many miracles that had to occur, and they did. And then all of a sudden, the hammer comes down on Mike Flynn, on General Mike Flynn, and people are starting to question, what is going on here? Why is this happening? And the more time that has gone by, and it's something that I talk about all the time, Ron, I talk about that how the truth always comes out, how the truth always rises. And, and I have people that attack me all the time, about all kinds of weird stuff, and things that they say that I do or whatever. And what we have to understand is even those people that are attacking us, it's like there is a good and there is an evil. And the one thing that people have to understand is that evil does exist, but to your audience, to your great audience, and I tell this to a lot of audiences that I stand in front of, when I kind of put my arms out like this as though I'm embracing the audience, as though I'm embracing you, Ron, there's good in all of us, right? There's good in all of you. And that's what we have to remember, that good always is much more powerful than evil, but evil will work. It'll work the demons in the room to the degree that it can in order to stop good from coming out in all of us. That's what this movie, I think the emotional roller coaster that this film does take people through, because you will cry, you will laugh, you will be angry. And at the end, you should be inspired about how one person, through their faith and their family, was able to rise above an incredible level of evil that actually is a minor component of the life of America, but it holds a evil component of power, right? It holds power, and that power is dark. And one of the things that we have to do as Americans is we have to understand that, and we have to understand that we can overcome that by shining light on everything, being transparent about everything, not being worried about hiding something or this or that, and putting a bright light of authenticity, humility, honesty on top of this darkness that does pervade the United States of America today. Like it or not, it's very true. So anyway, I mean, those are just my sort of stream of consciousness, as we get into a discussion today on your show.
Thanks a lot. You said similar things when we met at Mar-a-Lago a few months ago, and there is, I'm sitting here. If I had not watched at least part of the movie, and especially the first half hour grabs you. You're once you start, you're not going to stop unless you have an interview scheduled with Mike Flynn. It's not about you.
Right.
You are the microscope through which we see major institutional problems in this country. And because in other words, I'm thinking to myself, what is my audience who have not watched the movie thinking? Oh, so Mike Flynn is getting on Ron's show and saying, this movie about me is the greatest thing I ever saw. The movie's not about how Mike Flynn is the greatest thing the greatest guy you ever. Of course, you got to tick off the extraordinary career accomplishments. Of course, this is a man of great accomplishments, but we get past that pretty fast. It very, very quickly gets into the core issues, and it's just an extraordinary thing. And this is going to be a little bit more disjointed than our typical culmination, because there's so many things I want to touch on with you. First, when I was doing my initial research, because you and I have known each other on the internet for many years, but like you made a good description of people in Oklahoma City, everyone kind of knew the outlines, but without necessarily knowing the specifics. And I realized, oh, this is a Rhode Islander. So my wife grew up in Peacedale.
Oh yeah, I love it.
And you went to URI. And
Yeah.
what are you, and you're talking about the ocean. Well, why the hell didn't you go Navy? What was that all about?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I have a grandfather who's deceased, of course, now, but who spent over 40 years in the Navy. And I grew up actually in a Navy town. I grew up in Middletown, Rhode Island, which is across the bay from Peacedale. But and of course, Newport, Rhode Island is a Newport Navy base. And my father was retired sergeant from the Army, and I was born on an Army base. And I, looking back, I think that partly why I always liked, and in my sort of following my father's footsteps, that I always liked the Army more. And I think I spent so much time as a kid around the Navy that I just felt like I wanted something different. But then when I went to the University of Rhode Island, which is right next to Peacedale, there in Kingston,
big oceanography program,
huge oceanography program. They have a huge, probably one of the top oceanography programs in the country, and fisheries program too. One of the best fisheries programs. My brother Jack, who's in the film, he's actually a graduate of the fisheries program there at URI. But when I went to URI had a Army ROTC program, and had I not gone to college out of high school, which I went right from high school right into the University of Rhode Island, I probably would have enlisted in either the Marine Corps or the Army. I just believe that. And, and I have a story about the Marine Corps that I won't go into today, but that's another film. But so that URI had an ROTC program, and I used to, when I went there to URI, my first year, my freshman year, I went down and I took a couple of the ROTC classes. I got to know the cadre there. That was the ROTC. Now this is 1977. So this is only a couple of years after the Vietnam War, right? Where, joining the military was the military was still reeling from the results of Vietnam, and it wasn't an attractive career for many. There was still a lot of animosity, I think, against war and against the military, particularly at that time. It's 1977. So here I am, I think because of my upbringing, and then I was born on an Army base. I actually lived as a child over in Germany when my father was assigned as an instructor at a non-commissioned officers, a sergeant's academy over in southern Germany for my early years. And so I remember those days and hanging around with him, and just a lot of times like that, right? So I was attracted to the military from the day that I can remember. Which path I took, I ended up going to URI. It's like, God intervenes in every aspect of our lives. I believe that more today than I've ever believed. And
it's funny. I remember that you mentioned the naval base at Newport. When my wife's parents retired, they had a place in Jamestown, right across the bay from the naval base. And one time there was an aircraft carrier. No, it couldn't have been an aircraft carrier. I don't think it could. There was some.
Yeah. No, there was probably an aircraft carrier.
A damn big ship. And from across the bay, I could see that this was. So we took a drive around, and we got relatively. You can only get so close. It's a military base, but I had never. I mean, here in New York, we have the Intrepid, which is a rowboat compared to, modern. And I started crying.
Yeah.
I said, I cannot fathom that God has chosen to empower this country with such phenomenal earthly power.
Yeah.
It's mind-boggling to me. And yet, as you mentioned, there is this streak of, you call it evil, and it's hard to understand. Let me just ask you something. You were in the Obama administration.
Right.
Did his view of how to use American military power spring from a difference of opinion about how to maximize American influence? Or is it true what people frequently say, which was that his goal was actually to contract American global influence, in your view?
Yeah, I mean, so first of all, I think that just on the topic of evil, evil manifests itself in human beings, not machines.
Right.
And so human beings are the ones that decide how to direct the machinery, sort of the earthly powers, if you will, of what a nation state possesses: aircraft carriers, a strong economy, all the trappings of greatness. If you use it to achieve good things, right? If you use it to achieve really, really positive things. I think that we're heading, and this gets back to your second part, really, which is Obama. We are heading towards a place, if we're not careful here, we're heading towards a globalist system of government, headed up by globalist institutions, United Nations, World Bank, World Health Organization, World Trade Organization, World Economic Forum. So a globalist, government and governance with these globalist institutions. So what does that mean for America? So does America need to contract in terms of its type of powers that America has always stood for, certainly since post-World War II, right? If not since post-World War I, but certainly since post-World War II. So America has become this great power, this great nation state, because of a whole variety of things. And I do believe it's because we are principally a great nation of really, really good people who believe in Judeo-Christian principles and values, but also accept a diversity of other opinions and other aspects of who people are. I think Barack Obama, what he wanted to do is he wanted to, as he said, he wanted to fundamentally change America and change it toward a system that becomes a globalist system. So therefore you have to, and it's your word, I guess, contract, which means that, it means that, to withdraw, to bring in, to suck in this greatness. So I'm not sure it's a contraction of power of America. It's a contraction of power of the American people. I think more than a contraction of the government. And I think that
no one would accuse him of wanting to contract the government. I think that.
Well, and so now it doesn't mean to make the government smaller. It actually means to contract the government's power into a place called Washington, D.C. So all aspects of decision making, all aspects of power resonate from the center and not from the 50 beautiful states that we have that have their own constitutions, their own governments, their own ability to be able to make laws and to pass ideas and to innovate and do all the great things that makes our country great. The fabric of America and what makes our country great is that sort of constitutional diversity of having, now 50 states. Whereas a guy like Obama wanted the power at the center. And I think if there's a contraction, it's a contraction away from what the Constitution has really created and our founders created, which is a diffusion of power to the states. And they gave that power to the original 13 colonies that then turned into the original 13 states. And instead of giving it all to Washington, D.C., people like Obama, they want to give it to Washington, D.C. And they want all the power to be there.
On the world stage, though, the contraction that I have in mind is, especially in the Mideast, this idea that let's talk about hegemony.
Yeah.
Given your orientation, Kennedy Democrat, America force for good. Everything you've said is about that sort of Lincoln concept, humanity's last best hope. Listening to the first 10 minutes, the preview type part of the movie, a lot of people might be under the impression that you are perhaps an isolationist, which would be crazy if anyone had any familiarity with your career. Is
Right.
hegemony good? Is it good for America to be the most powerful nation in the world, all things being equal?
I think so. My short answer is yes. My explanation of that answer is that we must maintain a level of humility as a great nation. And I think that if we ever demonstrate an attitude of arrogance, we have lost the shine of what America was always designed to be, which is a very humble, benevolent leader, among itself, first and foremost, for its own people, for our own citizenry. I think that's, if there's one or two character traits of our founders that they sort of imbued in all of us, is the idea of benevolence, of humility, and of making sure that it's not about them, it's about you, it's about us as a nation. And I think as long as we maintain that level of humility, we can maintain and we should maintain this great nation state status where it's not to pat ourselves on the back about, hey, we're number one in the world. It's to say, look, America is a great nation. We welcome with open arms people. We welcome with open arms, allies and partners and alliances who want to work with a nation that can help others because they see how we're helping ourselves. Our problem today is that we're not helping ourselves, and we've become, the government has become arrogant to the needs of its citizens in our country today, and that is very clear. It's undeniable. The efforts that our government is taking, and to me, it's a sign of arrogance to think that, that we know what's best for the American people, and so we're going to impose these rules and these restrictions and these regulations on the American people to quote unquote make their lives better. That's an arrogance. That's not humility. Whereas the humble leader doesn't mean weak leader. It means just a humble, benevolent leader turns to the citizens and says, and clearly understands by communicating, by getting what I call that fingertip feel of what the citizens want and need, a sentiment of what is it that is best for the American people, and then working to that end instead of the other way around where it's like, I know what's best for you. Here's what you're going to do. Here's the regulations. Here's the laws. Here's the rules. Our problem. Because I don't want to always point a finger at a Barack Obama or at our government, because we are the ones, we the people, we are the ones that have allowed and enabled this attitude to grow inside of our government, because frankly, we don't get involved in our political lives like we should. Everybody, I've had many conversations like this, Ben. I mean, you have too, Ron. I mean, where people go, I don't want nothing to do with politics. Those politicians are all corrupt. Well, yeah, of course they are. And we just keep allowing them to run for office and win. And we have politicians who are in federal, state, and even local politics who have been in there for 10, 15, 20, 40, 50 years. And you kind of go, well, no wonder. There's no one, right? You know what I'm saying, Ron? So, I mean,
of course, but you also make a point of, you said before, it's not only at the national level, it's also at the local level, and not only school boards and stuff like that. But I quit the New York City Bar Association when they came out in support of what was going on in the DC court against you. It was so obviously corrupt, it's their prerogative as a bar association. People should understand that in in New York, the bar associations, we don't have what's called a unitary bar. These are just professional associations. They don't have any effect on anything. They're social, they're professional. I wasn't going to be a part of an organization that said, we as lawyers consider it an appropriate use of the rule of law for a judge to privately appoint a prosecutor from an elite New York law firm to prosecute a former official who wants to withdraw a guilty plea. It blew my mind. It was so unbelievable to me. But you make a really important point, and it helped me understand your earlier answer about Obama better. Because I keep talking about foreign policy and hegemony and leadership, and you keep reminding me that you can't separate foreign policy from the social and political fabric of what's going on in the country itself.
Right.
This is eye-opening to me.
Yeah, it's so a couple of things. Number one, war, which I'm familiar with. And in the movie, in the film, and you'll see what you just described with this judge in the second half of the movie. As you get into it, you're going to be, it's going to make you angry. It'll make a guy like you angry because of what you just said. But war, I am not I'm not anti-war. I say that I'm anti-stupid war, right? And I'm certainly anti-endless wars. And in the film, and that's why we had, when we were deciding on how to flow this movie, because I wanted this movie to be exactly what you'll all see, what your audience will see. It's a very intimate look inside of my family and the decisions that I had to make. And there's some very pointed inside information that I provide that have never talked about before. And so when it comes to war, I want people to understand that, sort of partly why did they go after me so hard? What was I aware of? What are the things that I am pro or con to? And that foundation that we set in the first probably third of the movie, where we talk about, we go back to the 60s, and we go back to decisions. We go back to the assassinations of the 60s. I put in there Eisenhower specifically to again warn the American people about the military-industrial complex, which was not fully developed at the time, but today we are facing it, and it's much more developed. So we have these components and these institutions that have grown frankly, in 60 years, right? For the better part of almost 2 generations now. So that's, you sort of table that and you say, okay, so that exists right now. And then this issue of us, right? Us being the American people and how you have broached it to your audience. I mean, to me, we have a responsibility that the American people have lost sight of. I really believe this. I do believe now, and frankly, the positive of social media is that more people are waking up, because social media is driving a lot of information into people's lives today that they're not going to find on the corporate media, and they're just not going to find it there. So people are looking for the truth. And I always go back.
That's why they had to ban you.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. That's why they have to censor people. That's why they have to force some of us out, because again, and it's like towards the end of the movie, and I'll tease a little bit, because Tucker Carlson's he gives a couple of descriptions in this film. He's someone who's a great friend, and he talks about this in the movie, and it's really about me, because it's our relationship, which changed dramatically in the last 8 years. I mean, where Tucker really thought, maybe Flynn is a Russian spy, right? Oh my God, I can't believe what our government has done. And Tucker talks about, and he makes a comment about me. He says, whether you believe General Flynn or not, what General Flynn is telling you is something that he firmly believes in, and I firmly believe what I say. And I am the first one to say, if somebody says to me, well, that's wrong, and here's why it's wrong, and then I might argue for a second, but then I'm going to go back and I'm going to research, and I'm going to say, you know what, this guy or this gal they prove me wrong, I'll go back to that person and I'll say, hey, you were right. I'm sorry that I had that argument, but I've learned a lesson. So part of what we have to do as Americans is we have to, this old adage about, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. Then old dogs die away, because we have to learn. We have to be lifelong learners. My mother taught me that. We have to be lifelong learners, and we have to learn that there is a threat to the United States of America, and it has always been there from the very foundation of our country, and it's clearly there now. And there are ideological underpinnings that are willing to usurp who we are as a nation. So the American people have to get involved again in the political lifeblood of our country. You cannot leave this to chance. You cannot leave this up to others who, and many of those others have helped to get us to where we are, meaning they've helped essentially rip apart the fabric of the United States of America, this quilt that we are, that's now 50 states. So, I implore your listeners, to one, watch the film. I think they'll be blown away and they'll be like, oh my God, I did not know this. But two, I implore your listeners to get out there and seriously consider, what is their role? What is my role? So now I'm talking as though I'm a listener. Like, I want your listeners to say, what is my role? One of the questions, and I'll stop here in a second, Ron. One of the questions that I want people after watching the film to answer is, what are you willing to fight for? What are you willing to fight for? Yeah, there's Tucker right there. And if people can answer that question honestly, truthfully, then they'll realize, one, what I went through. They'll realize what our country is going through, and they'll realize what they now must do as an American citizen, and they must get involved. And now's the time to do it. We have a little time left, and you can't wait for somebody else to do it. Now, all of us have to step up.
You stepped up. You've really sacrificed a lot, and I was so gratified to see that you came out with this film, because there was people, as you put it before, people have attributed a lot of things to you in the years since you were taken down.
Right.
And this film enables you to tell your own story and to get it straight. And people can believe it or not believe it if they want to. But until now, there has been this really disjointed version of the narrative. And thankfully, because of things like, look, this movie wasn't going to make it into national distribution.
No.
To a major movie studio. But we're living in a time when it is possible to have discussions like this that can reach thousands of people.
Yeah.
And you have streaming media like this. Your background is in intelligence. You mentioned Ike. On the one hand, Ike had this warning. As the CIA grew, he distrusted it. He had real questions about it, and yet he couldn't resist playing with the toys. The U-2, it was amazing to him. He realized that it would give him power in his negotiations with Khrushchev over arms limitations. You also, understanding all this, you studied it and then you lived it. Was your thinking that I'm gonna make changes from the inside? Yeah,
absolutely. And working with Trump from the time we met up until things started to really get twisted around, and frankly, because of people inside of the White House, which I tell that in the movie.
Sure.
And people, and I won't go any further because it's a big part of the movie. I mean, people need to understand that this is not just, Obama, or the Democrats. This is what, this is the power of evil, right now inside of Washington, D.C. So, there's a very famous story about Kennedy while he was alive and while he was the president, and all these generals and admirals and the CIA director were all in the Oval Office, And they were basically telling him that we need to go to World War III. Now's the time, right? The whole Cuban Missile Crisis, everything. Now's the time to go to World War III. We have to do this now. And Kennedy's like looking at him like, because they had Eisenhower, who had just, wrapped up being the president, right? 8 years. And now you got JFK in there, and they think that they're going to take advantage of this young whippersnapper, and like my family, we say we're Kennedy Democrats, which we were. And Kennedy was not, again, he was not anti-war. He was anti-stupid war. And he definitely didn't want to get involved in something that we were going to be the cause of. And so he was looking to fight for peace. JFK was looking to fight for peace. He was not looking to start a war, which is what all of his advisors, many of whom came out of the, sort of came along from the Eisenhower administration into the Kennedy administration with the Dulles brothers. Yeah, with a few exceptions, not many exceptions. And so it's kind of like, to a degree. So you had Obama for 8 years, and Trump comes in, and instead of, an entirely new group of people, a lot of the people that were still there were coming into the Trump administration. And the military industrial complex, the security state complex, the censorship complex was all very fully developed. And so now you're, without really knowing it, because again, I'm not going to sit here and say that I because people ask me, well, you should have known. Well, hindsight is 20/20 with everything, as we know. And so, if there's and I think that, I talk about this in the movie, I really do walk through, and the, people in the movie, I give them an intimate look into my decision-making. And when I say mine, my family and I, my wife and I, my children and I, it's a very, very emotional film. And I wanted people to understand this because this happens to too many people too often in this country. But at this level, we're now talking about the fabric of our society. And we're talking about, the potential damage to our national security system, which is at the presidential level and doesn't just affect things over there, right? Overseas. It affects the domestic fabric of our nation and our ability to function as, safely and securely as families, as people in this country. So there's some similarities, but when they did that to Kennedy realized right away, hey, you got, basically, and I'm thinking what he probably was thinking, these guys are all nuts. All these generals and admirals and all these people around me, they want to start a war with Russia. And everybody knew at the time that there were nuclear weapons that had already been tested. So what are we going to do? And Kennedy stopped it. He stopped it. And because he stopped it, it basically created the conditions for the powers to be to assassinate a duly elected president of the United States of America. And at the time, that's why we say in the movie, we really do need to reassess the assassinations, plural, of the 60s, because what our government was capable of doing then, you now start to look at what they're capable of doing now, right? And now the assassination, as I talk about in the film, I talk about the assassination by narrative, right? By narrative. So they take the corporate media, they take the intelligence community, they take the weaponized elements of the government, particularly the Department of Justice, the FBI. They take their some other media components, like particularly these voices of record, they call them, right? The New York Times, the Washington Post, and they just spew out, just utter lies about an individual, in my case, myself. And now Donald Trump they just absolutely lie about it constantly. It's the Goebbels, right? It's the Goebbels effect. Keep pounding them lies, and eventually they'll believe it's the truth. And enough people will do that, just like what happened in the early 1930s of Nazi socialism, okay, which under Hitler. People think Nazis, Hitler was a socialist, right? I mean, among a psychopathic dictator. But there, so you have to piece together these segments of history that have strong indicators of where America is at today. And it really does take me back to your initial question about, about Obama and, the idea of contraction. It's probably not the right word, but it's this idea of taking America down a different path than the path that we are on, which is a path of constitutional republicanism, where the government is represented, and we do that through we the people who elect our representatives. So it's sort of a citizen's representation through this constitutional system of government we have for people to be elected to represent the people, right? I mean, that's the essence of who we are. And we have forgotten that. Our people that are in very senior positions, and one of whom was the president of the United States, who want to change that. They want to take us down this path. When they say, they're a danger to democracy. Well, we're not a democracy, right? I mean, so democracy can have socialist ideas. It can have communist ideas, okay? I mean, so you have to be careful with the words that people are spewing, believe in what the law says, and then let's follow. I mean, Ron, you're a lawyer. I mean, so, I want people to follow the law. I want the law to be equal to all. I don't want it to be equal. I don't want it to be only those of us who are conservatives to be attacked, right? I mean, your diatribe of the Judge Sullivan, which I talk about in this film quite a bit, because people need to understand that, the way that this judge took on my case, after it was dismissed. I mean, I pulled my guilty plea, which I had the right to do, and we fought. I didn't want to, I don't want to get into too much of the film, but then I get in front of this judge, and this judge goes through all this stuff. But then when my case is dismissed, the judge then takes it on. Well, in the system of government, the government of France, judges are judge, jury, and executioner, right? So you go in front of a judge in a French court, he can do whatever the hell he wants, right? But in the American courts, once a case is dismissed by the prosecution, or in this case, the Department of Justice, there's nothing more to do. You don't have anybody prosecuting you. The case is dismissed. And the judge, all he's supposed to do is just say, get out of my court, have a nice day, and if there's some ethics problems by the prosecution, the judge can, review the ethics of what the prosecution initially did. The judge never did that, of course. What he did was he continued to prosecute me with this other friend of his for another 8 months. And
those 8 months prevented your case from being heard by the Supreme Court, because the DC Circuit wasn't going to do jack for you.
Right.
And therefore President Trump had to pardon you, because otherwise who the hell would have, and what would have happened? You never really got the vindication that you were entitled to. One quick question before we go. When you and I met, you made a point of saying something about Israel. Ally? Yeah. Is Israel an ally? Is Israel a valuable
yes,
ally?
So Israel is one of the closest allies, that the United States has, and from a variety of very formal and certainly informal relationships and things that we have sat down and signed off on. So there's formal and there's informal. But the one thing I think, and if I remember correctly when we spoke, I think that Israel will always survive. Israel will always survive. But I do believe that the state of Israel is at risk of its survival right now because of the actions of the current administration in the White House, the previous administration to Trump, and the relationship that our administration, has with the leading state sponsor of terrorism in Iran, and then Iran's ability and frankly actions to command and control and resource all of these affiliates of Iran, like Hezbollah, Hamas, the
And the
Houthi
American
rebels.
university system.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. And, Syrian defense forces. I mean, there's all kinds of aspects of the relationship that the United States under this administration and the Trump administration with Iran, and then how this whole thing is kind of intertwined.
What did the Trump administration do wrong? This is fascinating for me to hear.
Yeah, I think that what Trump did right was of course, the moving of the embassy to demonstrate a very strong, powerful message of what Israel, and now I'm not talking about the state of Israel, but Israel means, and what Jerusalem means, from the purposes of historical consequence. Very, very powerful message. The other aspect of what I think needed to happen, and maybe in a second administration he could have done this, because the whole agreement that he had with the Abraham Accords. But I think that what must happen, and I actually wrote about this in a book about 8 years ago called The Field of Fight. But what must happen is the Arab nations must take greater responsibility for themselves. This Palestinian problem. There's no Arab nations jumping up and down going, hey, we'll take the Palestinians. We'll take care of our brothers. No, they're not, because they know how much of a farce this entire thing is. And so the Arab world must take greater responsibility for itself. And, what is this attitude? Yeah, Field of Fight is a national bestseller. I wrote it in 2016 with Michael Ledeen, another great friend of mine. People can, it's still, it's actually very popular now because of the war. The name of the book is Field of Fight: How to Win the War Against Radical Islam and Its Allies. And I outline the allies in there. And guess what? Guess what, Ron? All of the allies are all the same allies that we're facing today. So I put solutions in there. Michael Ledeen and I, we lay out solutions in that book. So the things that I wrote about, that was 8 years ago, prior to becoming the National Security Advisor. And those are the things that I wanted to bring into the Trump administration. I think that Trump went to a point, but I think that what really needed to happen was the American foot needed to be put down, and in no uncertain terms, the Arab world needed to be told, you must take responsibility for your actions in your part of the world here. And if you want to be, seen on the world stage as something more than just, a transactional partner, right? You want to be seen as a world leader at different levels. Now I'm throwing in the ideas of G7 and G20, because we're just coming off the heels of the G7. So there's so much to package here. And that, to me, is where a future Trump administration must go. And again,
that would take extraordinary courage. I don't say that Donald Trump doesn't have it, but he'd have to show quite a bit more of it this time around.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, Ron, I appreciate your time and your audience. I appreciate your support over the years. And we never really met each other. I want your audience to know we never really met each other until we met, I think, at Mar-a-Lago. And this is how we are connecting these days. We're connecting through this digital world that's seeking truth.
And it was like we'd known each other for years, though. And that's the amazing thing, is how this works. Is it instant recognition? I mean, we understood the level on which we should be communicating, and it was great. But this takes it to a new level. Can't thank you enough for joining us today.
Thank you, and appreciate you helping to promote the film. People need to go to flynnmovie.com, and they can stream it. I think it's like somewhere between $3.99 and $5.99, I think.
Please skip one of those fancy coffees, for God's sake. You can afford it, you cheap bastards.
Right.
All
Very
right.
helpful. Very helpful. All right. God bless, Ron. See you. Thank you.